So that is the empowerment. We should address economic empowerment. How do we assist women so that in future they must be proud of their children? They must say, my child is not going to be sold to any man. For as long as we do not address economic empowerment, for as long as we do not say BBEE quota, how do we ensure that our women benefit from that? We shall have these problems. What do we do? COVID-19 is here. We have heard many things said about COVID-19. Some of the things are very shameful to us. But what are we doing? Are we assisting women to gain access into the procurement in cities? What do we do as councillors in the city of Joburg? What do we do about those women that have the skill, the expertise, that are sitting at home, that used to work in factories, that can make clothes, that can make masks for the city? Are we just saying, no, we know me, so this woman can make clothes, and then we go to that woman to make us dresses? But are we ensuring that they also gain access to what we provide in the city? Our officials speak about the economic opportunities for people. They speak about, when they speak about that, then they speak about big business. They don't consider women, the women that cannot fill a tender form, but that have expertise. What do we do as women councillors in the city of Joburg? Perhaps because the councillors are present here today, I should pose a question to them, and I should challenge them to say, comrades, after this, we need to have a serious discussion, and that discussion must result in implementation. What are we doing for women? What are we doing? Are we supporting women in construction? Are we supporting women in IT? Are we supporting women in specialized services? How do we ensure that these women are supported? And I think that from today, when we speak as councillors, we speak with some determination. We speak with some passion to say that we are passionate about the women here. And Chairperson, I am talking about this because I once watched a program where I saw executive director. Okay, thank you, Dadan. I must applaud or commend Mema Mlambo Nuka. I said, yo, this woman is really working hard. Now she's into sports because she challenged I think it was PSL or FIFA, and said, let the women players get the same salary as male players. And I said, that's good. Because I remember I made noise about it once. I said, they kick the ball, they get injured on the field. Why do they get less money than male players? Is it because they are women? Why are they discriminated against? And she fought, and she fought. And I saw her, and I said, Malibongwe, this is what we mean by Malibongwe, where a woman will stand up and say, I have identified this problem. I am going to speak to those men, and they are going to do what they are supposed to do. So, program director, my journey of 7 days, 7 nights without sleep, solitary confinement, sleeping on a cement floor, not on the beds like in Sun City, being beaten, being persecuted even after my release from prison, was not a journey in vain. It wasn't in vain. It will only be in vain when I'm insulted at my age by the younger generation that would say, Ona ageism. Then I'll say, my struggle was in vain. Otherwise, it wasn't in vain. Thank you. I'm done.
Molly, can you hear me? Comrades, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. Thank
Yes,
you.
we
Sorry,
can.
I was struggling to unmute myself there for a minute. I just want to say thank you very much, Ma'am Molly. I feel your pain from where I am around additional discrimination, despite the amount of strides that you have made thus far as it pertains to ageism. It is most unfortunate that we find ourselves with young people who believe they can, and only to find that when we go back in the annals of history, we only to quote for them what we have already done, exactly what it is that they are trying to do. Instead of taking a leaf and the baton forward, they do sometimes take a step backwards because they believe they can at that particular time. But thank you ever so much for your sacrifice. A thank you is never enough, but I do believe and agree with you fully that your struggle was not in vain. And we dare not falter. We dare not give up. And indeed, when you talk about gender-based violence, and Mamsoti also touched upon it, at the root cause of it, yes, there is alcohol, but there is also an issue of people having lived through families where abuse has been rife. But most importantly, it's the economic injustice against women that has happened in this country for so long. Yes, we went from no percent to 30%, 30% now percent to about 40, which is part of the government's plan. We've also had preferential procurement, but we always run the risk as women in senior management trying to say we need to employ women, we need to ensure women are the ones who are getting the preferential procurement, then of course you are correct. It is a no-win situation, but come what may, we've got to find a way of being protected when we seek to implement that which is due to us, to arrive at economic empowerment, where we are able to have the power that we need, emancipation, where we are set free from all the laws, all the social ills, all the political barriers that keep us from being emancipated as women. Just a few housekeeping rules. Thank you so much, Mema Moli. And I do hope that as young people, we will find it in ourselves to come back and say, as some of the apartheid opposites had found their way to Madiba and others, to say, we're really sorry. Because it certainly cuts quite deep to experience further discrimination in what is a land and government for which you fought. Just some keeping is that those who are not speaking, if you could kind of turn off your video, would really appreciate that. It might make for better sound quality on some of our sides. And then, of course, please do mute yourself as well. And for the speakers, we ask that you be on video, and we greatly appreciate that. And then, of course, now I understand we are ready for the audio by Mayor Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, our former Deputy President and the current Executive Director at the United Nations and the Secretary General for UN Women. Thank you, Thabo and the team. Colleagues, I'm not sure if we are able to project yet. I know that it's not showing on my side, but if we're still having challenges, can I propose, because the video is only about 6 minutes long and we won't lose it, can I propose we move on to those who are on the panel at the moment and who are with us, if that's okay? But I do stand guided by that.
Happy Women's Day, South Africa, and Happy Women's Month. Indeed, we say Happy Women's Month, even though this is a time of challenges and difficulties because we do aspire all women and girls to have a happy women's and to have a happy life every day wherever they are. It is a time to both protest as well as to celebrate what we have achieved. This year, we also mark the 25 years since the most comprehensive agreement of nations about gender equality in Beijing. That work has not been completed, and that is why we have generation equality to take this work forward between 2020 and 2025. And we thank South Africa for being part of this effort and for focusing especially on fighting for economic justice as well as fighting to end men's violence against women. This is 2020, a year of challenges. COVID-19 has meant that about 2/3 of the people who have lost their jobs at this time are women. So women's poverty is a reality because women work in the informal sector. Women have no savings in general, no insurance, and they do not generally have enforceable contracts, especially in the service sector, in the hospitality and in the tourism sector, where jobs have been lost in large amounts. We are therefore asking for the fiscal stimulus that is provided by government to please pay attention in a granular way to how this will also benefit women. We urge activists, business organizations, women who are accountants, AUCA, to make sure that these fiscal stimulus respond to women's needs. We have violence against women that have spiked, and we have called for the needs that women have at this time when they are affected by violence to be declared essential services so that they are accessible to women anytime as women need them. Be they shelters, hotlines, but we also want to strengthen the implementation of the good laws we already have in South Africa. We also want to echo the words of President Ramaphosa to call on the men of South Africa to stand up and not be bystanders and fight to end this violence against women. We appreciate the role that the churches are playing. We applaud also the men that are coming forward to provide leadership by mobilizing other men. We applaud Make. We applaud John Kani. We applaud Siya Kolisi, who has also been announced as the UN champion on ending violence against women. We applaud young psychologists who are trying to understand this. Applaud Gender Justice for the work it does, but we need much more than this. It is not enough. During COVID, we've also seen the importance of digital infrastructure, the need to make sure that all communities have access to digital services, and we also have to close the digital gender gap. We also have to make sure that all girls go back to school when schools reopen for everybody. We must not lose the girls along the way. We worked so hard for girls' education. We must not let COVID-19 lose this momentum that that we have gained. Same thing on maternal health. We have to that made maternal health, and we still have much more to do. We appreciate all South Africans who are taking the right steps to end the pandemic, and we urge those who have not been able to do as much as they need to do their part. And we also ask for the end of corruption, because women lose a lot when public resources are being siphoned and stolen. I thank you for listening to me, and I hope that we see this as a new beginning. We cannot go back to the world before COVID. We have to create a new world for ourselves. We get one chance to do this as this generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very calm presentation, yet insightful in terms of where to from here. It is important, I think, from the message that Umam Mlabuluka has given to us, that we take heed thread around economic justice, economic empowerment, what is due to the majority of women. While one appreciates the 40%, I must say that I'm not sure why we should have less than half of the procurement we make up more than. These are the women who have started us off. Year two, it's the next phase of younger women who are carrying us through. And by the time we get to Zweda, we'll be in year three and we'll be on the highway, full speed. But just don't be like me and get tickets. But that's where we would be. But the National Treasury tells us that in the central database of the National Treasury for all departments, provincial and local, that there are only 29% of women-owned businesses that are on that database. So if the president is 40% in the medium-term strategic framework, the government's plan of action for the next 5 years, 4 years remaining, is that 40% of procurement needs to go. Essentially, it means 40% of overall procurement, but if they're only 30% or 29%, it means it's 40% of the 30. So it's even much less than what we would want to do. The risk, however, and which is what I'm hoping that of course, I would say the younger generation, because I'm somewhere here in between colleagues, so I'm not quite with you. I've been there, done that, and I'm a little bit further along. So before we hear from Kate, and before we hear from Itumeleng, and before we hear from Fasha, we need to just be sure that we are now taking the next step. What is the practical step? Yes, you've been involved, and I don't think you were saying I am embarking on a political struggle. We're being involved for a cause at a particular point in time. What then do we take forward? How? The foundation has been laid. How then do we take this forward? Can we then have Kate, our political science student? I wonder, you seem to be wearing a graduation gown already. I wonder if you still, I think your profile said you were still going to be studying something else. But be that as it may, Kate, over to you, darling.
Very good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity, Program Director. You will correct me if I am wrong, but I understand that you posed a question to me, and it's not time to present as of yet. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
I never want to take speakers off their mark. Whichever mark you feel is good to take off from, go ahead. So you can answer the question, present as you present, answer, but it's your time.
Not a problem. I think I will start obviously with the most important aspect of this conversation that we are having today, and that is the responsibility that I have been given to dissect uh, the role of academia when it has to do in relation to politics and governance. But before I begin, I would like to say a very good afternoon to you, in specific, Program Director, to the MMC and all MMCs present here today. I'm not sure if the Honorable Mayor is in attendance as well, but I would also like to extend my greetings to Ntate Makubo. And to my fellow panelists, it's an honor to be given such an opportunity to speak on behalf of the many women of this country who continue to carry such a big responsibility on their backs, whether it is responsibilities in a university space, universities in a responsibilities in a political space, or whether it is just those sole responsibilities that we carry on a day-to-day basis in our various communities. Um, I would also like to also just extend a warm thank you um, to our panelists for such amazing presentations. And it is no surprise that we are led by such amazing women, and women who continue to play a very pivotal role in the different, let me say, content environments and situations that they find themselves in. With that being said, I will dive into it. And I think I've been given such a it's a very controversial topic to speak on, and that is to say, what is the role of academia in politics and in governance? And I think it goes without saying that we need to recognize that academic life is in many ways inherently political. And that is because political decisions have an impact on all of us. It then begs the question, what is the role of academia in politics as a whole? And is the sole role of schools and universities to provide training for jobs, push us into the marketplace, or does academia and politics help in the work of society's ongoing adaptation and self-recognition? In my personally think academia's role goes beyond servicing the economy, and that it must be organized in such a way that it can actually perform the roles of adaptation and rethinking of the identity of society. Often the university is seen as very disconnected from the greater public. And it is seen as a separate and very distinct space from its surrounding communities and society. And while research is often pertinent to growing development in perhaps technology and thought, there's still a prevailing notion that academics are distant from society in a large part of their work. I think from a student's perspective, this holds a very different weight, especially in a society increasingly more insistent on the pressure placed on personal responsibility for all aspects of life. And I think that it is in the university space where we are introduced to learning outside of a classroom. Um, if there are people here who are members of SASCO or any other political affiliation, as soon as you step into the university space, you are then told that learning does not only take place in the classroom, and that it is when you are actively engaging, you become a ground force and you are continuously learning and working with other peers from different, or let me say, other political schools of thought, that you are then inducted to life outside of the classroom. Um, but it is also in the same instance that we as women are introduced to finding ourselves and using our voices in order to speak truth to power. It is also in the same university space where we learn to break the shackles of systems that continue to oppress us. Um, I, for one, I come from the Limpopo province in a small town called Zanin. And I come from a place where we are a very conservative type of people. There are certain things that you cannot do. You cannot look an elder in the eye and speak to them because it is often deemed as disrespectful. And then you get to a dynamic space such as an institution like the University of the Witwatersrand, and you are then faced with the reality of head-on contestation, but contestation in the most intellectual and respectful manner possible. It's all about vast engagement and intellectually providing a perspective while making sure that you are cognizant of the ideas and the perspectives and experiences of other people. And that is why it's so important that there continues to be a relationship between politics, academia. It is through the social activism and community engagement that students bridge the gap often found between the university and community, and further expanding their placement in national debates, but also working at a very localized level. I was very fortunate to be here and to be a part of the historic Fees Must Fall movement. And I think for me it was a turning point in my life, because when I came to university, the idea was that I'm here to get my degree, I'm here to learn, and I'm done, I'm going to work. And such a historic point in history then changes your thinking, it changes your perspective, because you are then opened or you are then exposed, for lack of a better word, to the injustices that actually exist within our communities. Where you could be sitting next to somebody in a lecture hall who, for example, is a victim of gender-based violence, is is somebody who does not have a place to stay, is a woman in this instance, who, for example, continues to be prejudiced and is not given access to opportunities. And it goes without saying that the Ubuntu aspect will always pull you to then look at life from a very different perspective, and for you to then jump out of yourself and to look at life from the lens of people who perhaps are struggling and are not granted the same privileges and opportunities as you. And I think learning in action, which is exactly for me what the Fees Must Fall movement was. It was learning in action. It taught us how participate and learning from work outside the university can actually help you develop and grow as a person. I think it also helped and assisted in breaking down the illusion often harbored by students, as the fact that we are here to get our degrees, and after getting my degrees, I am off to economic stardom, economic potential, and I'm just going to buy my dream car, and that's that. And I think that it is the political realm that forces us to stand up and to speak up to those that are less fortunate, and to also be cognizant of the reality it means to be a young Black woman in South Africa. Moving on to academia and government, I think policy making is obviously a core task for government, but in order for government to formulate well thought out policy, government has to be open to external ideas, and ideas may emanate from academics, because it is through academic evidence and the expertise of academics that government is able to formulate policies that are logical, coherent, and there also needs to be a very healthy engagement between academic policymakers. I said before, it is essential to the provision of informed, evidence-based, and world-class policymaking. And it goes without saying that rigorous academic research has influenced the decisions of government policy advisors, and in anywhere in the world, it's destined to score highly in assessment and economic impact. But what is the role of a woman in all of this? apart from us going to universities and being a part of a center that is aimed at teaching and we are aimed at this pursuit of knowledge, I think women have a very important role to play. Um, and I know that much has been written coming from academics themselves, but I think that it's important that the way that we communicate our ideas, the way that we communicate our research findings is very important, because there are instances where a person goes to university, they feel that they have gained a certain amount of knowledge, and then they struggle to come back into their communities to not only empower and inform, but they also fail to critically engage, for lack of a better word, how academia can benefit society. And I think it is when one is able to come down and use incisive and engaging language in well-designed briefings that we can share knowledge, not only knowledge amongst women, but knowledge in our communities as well, you know. And I think that there are real opportunities for collaboration between academia and policy makers to improve the way that the country is governed. But of course, naturally, in any circumstances, it won't always be harmonious. I think at the core, we need to recognize that at the heart of politics, heart of academia, and at the heart of governance is a continuous contestation of ideologies. And we as women, it's very often that many people will box us into us being feminists, or us belonging to a particular group of thinking, or us identifying with a particular ideology. But I think that women shy away from engaging in different ideologies. We shouldn't be afraid to tap into the uncomfortable. We shouldn't be shy, as Zosbini always says, that we shouldn't be shy to take space. And sometimes taking space means stepping out of yourself and doing things that you never imagined that you would be able to do. I think that the role of women in building an equal and just and a just society is exactly that. It's being able to say, I come from a very small town. There are certain things that I am not used to doing. There are certain things that I have not been taught to do. But the space that I currently occupy, the environment that I find myself in, social justice in itself requires of me to step out of myself and to do the unthinkable, to be able to speak on a platform and to realize that your voice is not just the voice of you speaking for yourself, but it is you speaking on behalf of women who continue to be oppressed, whether they are oppressed by their social circumstances, whether they are oppressed by the economic circumstances. We all know that women all over the world, and in particular in South Africa, continue to make sacrifices so that those around them can succeed. But I think that it is time that as women, we stopped compromising. I think that it is high time that as women, we stop allowing ourselves or delegating the responsibilities and delegating what the future may be like to other people. We need to come together as women and to take a stance to say that at the end of the day, we have ourselves, we are capable, and we are able to. And talent and knowledge is not enough. It is that unity, and it is that idea of a central goal that will take us further as a generation of young women. I think that the education of women, particularly those in rural areas, is key to breaking the cycle of struggle. There needs to be a more systematic and coordinated effort within communities to protect disadvantaged women. I think despite considerable achievements in trying to bring women's rights to the front, uh, far too many women, or let me say, the notion of gender equality remains largely rhetorical. normative frameworks that aim to ensure equality for women, they need to be translated into daily reality in the lives of all women. We also need to focus on social inclusion and to ensure that we integrate women in all sectors of development in accordance with their capabilities and their needs in order to ensure that we have a very peaceful and prosperous nation. I think as part of government's efforts, social justice does require of us to work to increase our expenditures to help women and to alleviate poverty. And I think that more resources need to be made available to eliminating violence against women and improving the socio-economic standing of women, amongst other things. This also means focusing on issues of reproductive health services, especially in rural communities. We know that access to higher education remains a rife and problematic issue. As an SRC member, at the beginning of every year, you are faced with the reality of young Black women facing academic exclusion. You are faced with the reality of women having to juggle the reality of being or coming from a child-headed household, and all of a sudden you are then responsible for your future without the necessary support and without the necessary financial muscle in order to at least get you through. And I believe that in order for us to eliminate the barriers to greater equity between men and women, especially in the labor market, we really need to advocate for the narrowing of the pay gap for equal work between men and something that has become very important is the issue of gender-based violence. And I think it's important, and it would be disingenuous of me to not speak on it. I think as the program director rightly mentioned at the onset, is that we've been having these conversations over and over again. And seemingly it almost as though nothing is changing. And the only thing that continues to change are the statistics of women who are dying at the hands of their most intimate partners. The only thing that continues to change is the area or the place or the university that is affected by the death of a young woman. And for me personally, I feel that at what point do we stop talking? At what point within our circles, do we start advocating for young women? At what point do we prioritize ourselves as women? Because I think it is very important that even in the academic space, when you look at the composition of council, when you look at the composition of Senate, majority remains white, male dominated. And even in other positions of for lack of a better word, authority, the status quo remains the same. And so my encouragement to everyone is that we need to dig deep as the young women of South Africa. We need to dig deep as the young women occupying academic spaces, as young women who continue to advocate for social justice and equity amongst men and women. We need to dig deep and say that at some point our priorities need to change, because it is the women of this country that continue to head households. It is the women of this country that continue to steer the direction of government. It is the women of these countries, of this country, that continue to keep these political organizations together. And one thing that remains central is the fact that we all have one particular that we want to be achieved for this country, and that is just to ensure that no young Black woman in particular is left behind. No young Black woman is left to suffer. And the ideal that I think should be pursued in the next lifetime by our generation should be ensuring that economic emancipation is the core of everything that we aim to achieve. With that being said, thank you so much for the opportunity. And if there's anything else programmed, I will remain in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and for a resolution-focused presentation, Kate, especially on issues of sexual and reproductive health and rights of young women in schools, but also not relinquishing our responsibility or our place, but rather taking our place up. The challenge of taking our place up is that we often, like you were saying, we are capable as young women, and oftentimes we have to actually say, no, well, not only is talented, skilled, and able, but we're also capable. And very few men have to say that about themselves. But thank you very much for that very focused approach. And indeed, economic empowerment is our new struggle. I believe that, and I think it's economic transformation rather than just empowerment. And I do believe that it's economic justice, that there has been an injustice on the economic front for women, and that we need to make sure that there is more justice. Without much further ado, in terms of time, let me then introduce the next speaker, so that they can also have their say and enlighten us on what they have to say. I also then want to just be mindful of time a bit, and it's always the case with as speakers come on board. People who are Dumeleng tend to not talk very much, but tend to want to do the research and do the writing. But it would be good to hear the voice behind the pen, paper, typewriter, computer, and all the research that you've dug into, and hear what your perspective is on this dialogue about women in politics and the role of women in building a just and non-sexist South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good morning. Good morning to the honourable members of council, MMC Mgcina, and the mayor of the city of Johannesburg, and others. Good morning to the panelists as well. I think it's been such a fruitful conversation thus far. And I think it becomes even more difficult to speak when, there's been such a richness in the information that has been presented on the topic. So I am sort of going to glance through some of the things which I think have been raised, but the inputs that I wanted to make along three sort of themes. And the first theme is really on, the issue of policy processes, and specifically the inclusion of marginalized groups and women. And the next theme then speaks to just highlighting issues around the representation of women in positions of authority and in institutions that, play an important role in making decisions in country. And I think the last bit is really on, what I think are the important take-homes and the important issues that we should, as women, but as society in general, sort of prioritize in this period that we are in. So I think the first point is to acknowledge, the importance of the sphere of politics and government, specifically as it relates to how it's provided a context for women to thrive, but also to, elevate their voice. I think it's important to acknowledge the work that has been done in this in our democratic period, where there has been, concerted efforts to including women. And I think from a general point of view, the gains of that are important and are quite, notable and should be carried forward. And I'm thinking now about the point that I want to raise is one on the importance of women organizing themselves as a group, not only as a group within the same generation, but also across generations. And I think one of the things that we are hearing in the discussion today is, an aspect of a discord that exists between, generations. And I think one of the key things about advancing women's struggles includes creating a platform for women to come together and to raise, their specific issues, and I think it provides a context of fast tracking and ensuring that there are gains to the efforts that women have made. And what's coming to my mind now is, I think Mum Sophie would probably know more about this, that in the 90s in Parliament there was what do they call it, a women's caucus sorry, a women's caucus that at the time was really lauded for some of the gains and the interventions that they have made. And I think over time, platforms such as those begin to be neglected, as if they don't add value and they don't champion the interests of women. And I think in the conjuncture that we are in right now, especially in the context of intergenerational discussions, not only discussions but also actions, it's important to intentionally reestablish those structures, those platform spaces where women can share their experiences of the workplace, of the political space, but also lift the issues that pertain to them. And I think this is something that should occur not only across generations but also across political parties. And I'm thinking now in the context of the city of Johannesburg that a platform that is like that for leaders, senior management within the city is something that could be instrumental. I think one of the things that we've seen, one of the main examples and examples that about this idea of women organizing themselves is how, when women are organized, they are able to achieve their specific needs which are related to women, not only at a personal level but also at a level of leadership. And I think we know that women thrive in contexts where they are supported themselves by other women in a political space, in a governance space. And I think it's also important to take into consideration how that kind of approach can be instrumental in policy making. And I think while there's, for many years now, there's been talks about bringing to the women to into processes. I think where we are now, we are sort of compelled to shift the needle a bit, and not only talk about is there are we mainstreaming gender issues? Are we including women? Is the woman at the forefront of the policy process, of discussion, of whatever framework? But rather to then say, to what extent is it really meaningful? And I think last year, could have been last year, there was a gender review of the gains of women's empowerment and women's transformation. And I think from that review we can actually take a lot in terms of not only identifying where the successes are, but also identifying where the gaps are. And I think what is required in this regard is to really begin to ask the critical questions. And I think from a research point of view, I think it's important to zoom in a bit closer in how policy implementation and formulation, zooming into that process and identifying what the gaps therein are, but then also asking the relevant questions. I think it's not enough. I think we've seen also that it's not enough to, have a policy in place and have some kind of attempt at implementing it without really then zooming into, asking the difficult questions about whether or not that policy that is in place is achieving, its goals and is really transforming the lives of women. And I think for me, this is an important, task, especially as it concerns, just the broader notion of building a developmental state, so which basically requires that while you move, you also stop and look back and re-strategize and reorganize yourselves, whether it's at a political party context or even at a governance level. I think one of the key things from that, as a passion point of mine, really is to understand the importance of bringing people to the conversation. It's enough to identify women in rural areas are the most vulnerable, and then make proposals about what needs to be done to lead these situations. I think what's more critical is to actually bring the people to the party. Bring the people. It's important to hear the actual voices of the people these aim to speak about. And I think I think for me, even moving forward, not only even at a governance level, but I think in our personal capacities, what Katie was speaking to is really interesting, because what she did was really place personify the struggle. And I think the importance of personifying the struggle then actually just means that the context to advance women's issues becomes more real and more achievable. So I think that's just one thing in that regard. Mindful of time, I'm feeling a bit under pressure to rush through some of the things. But the last point that I'd like to speak to is the one of representation of women. And I think, having said earlier that we've seen the strides that have been made by the ANC government in introducing women in structures of leadership, in positions of leadership. However, we are still mindful of the fact that there's still quite a long way to go. And I think the backdrop of this political work really has to be an appreciation of the role of the women's movement in South Africa, specifically as it concerns how the women's movement as a historical actor has shaped the discourse on representation and participation of women in leadership structures, and has also really brought to the center the question of advocating for women's needs, specific needs of women. I think the Women's Charter for Effective Equality of 1994 is still relevant and is still a well from which we can draw from as women activists, as people in governance, as people in political parties, because I think it gives direction. It gives direction and nicely categorizes the areas in which we can sort of go in advancing the women's struggle at a general level. And I think more practically, it's important to really be intentional about how the knowledge transfer between the older generation and the younger generation. I think it's important that within government departments, there are intentional programs that are aimed at building a consistency and sustainability of mentoring and grooming women for leadership. I think it is quite appalling that that the reality in senior management in departments, but also in the private sector, shows a very unequal you know, which I think so many years into our democracy should not be the case. And I think we must not grow weary as activists, but also as, you know, leaders in government. We can't grow tired of the work that has been done. I think it's important more than anything to really preserve the gains that have been made, and to ensure that, you know, there's longevity even there. I think this does require joining efforts between the different generations within political parties, but also in government. And I think while you know, the broader goal of gender transformation is important, it is in some parts linked to the overall, to the specific transformation of individuals in sort of positions of authority. So I think the point really is to say, being deliberate about transformation, being deliberate about, you know, ruffling the feathers, you know, being deliberate about being radical, about wanting radical change, is still something that is important and is required in the context that we are in. And I think as a way forward also, it's important to not only theorize around the issue, you know, say, what do we do, you know, as women in the different
Sorry, love, you've gone, you muted yourself. Please unmute yourself again.
Okay,
There you go.
Okay. I'm not too sure exactly where I was, but I'll just go to the last bit of what I want to contribute. And I think it was to say that while political theory is important, the grassroots reality and struggles of people are even more important. And I think we've done well as an international community, as, you know, the women's movement in South Africa and in the continent, to theorize around, you know, the issues that affect women. But I think also the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think more than anything, it's also pushed us to really start to identify what are the key, you know, could be seen as low-hanging fruit that we can maximize on in advancing women's struggles. And I think for me, what I think both all actors in the political space, specifically women, need to bring to the center the issue of climate change, and you know, I guess, you know, not only mitigating on climate change, but also the adaptation of climate change, specifically as it relates to women's vulnerability. And I think I do think that the decade that we are in, or maybe the century or this generation that we are in, is one that is solid. And I think to have a discussion about women and women's transformation and women's empowerment or development that is void of, you know, realizing how climate change will disproportionately affect women, in my opinion, is sort of a discussion that is amiss. And I think it's important that in our different roles, spheres of existence, we bring this issue, you know, as a primary, a focal issue. And I think this is obviously underscored by you know, the reality of, you know, at a more practical level, food insecurity, access to quality healthcare, access to quality education, etc. And I think, yes, of course, you know, there's been significant gains in some areas, but, you know, the gaps are there. And I think we do have an opportunity to really close the gaps. Our generation has the opportunity to really close the gaps in a meaningful way. And I think lastly, the idea of national solidarity, across gender lines is important. I think even in the history of the women's movement in general and in South Africa shows threads of, international solidarity on women's advancement, women's transformation, and gender equality. And I think now with the increasing notion of a global community, now more than ever, we have an opportunity to sort of unite across the globe and just really, highlight and advocate for and fight for, the issues that affect women. So yeah, I think for me that's something that's still quite relevant, and I think platforms like this one are critical because we really learn and now identify opportunities in which we can then take the next step. And I think in saying that, I am opportunistically saying that beyond this discussion, they must, whether in our separate spheres of existence, but there must be some kind of elevation of the discussion. Yeah, so I think I just maybe end there in terms of my contribution to the topic. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I have the honor and the privilege of welcoming the executive mayor of the city of Johannesburg, who had joined us earlier, and want to thank him for actually making sure that as a leader, he is in these conversations that women are having, and that in turn he would actually be able to influence the men within his circles. The boys club is always there. So Executive Mayor, thank you very much for your presence amongst us today. And I think that from the last two presentations, you would have heard the solution-focused young people's ideas. There have long been comments around how our national days should change and how money could be used differently. And this was before COVID, and then of course COVID happens, and then we are to change our national days, but not necessarily because we wanted to be able to redirect or reprioritize our funds in such a way that they could be used for something as critical as COVID. Similarly, we believe women's issues are as critical as Itumeleng indicates, and that priorities should be given to ensuring that women are able to also succeed. I know that there may be a slight change in terms of our speakers. I would like to go to Zueda if she is indeed next, and if indeed Fashia will then join us later or has had to attend to another commitment. Can I have
it's Fashia. It's Fashia. I'd spoken to the organizers. I can speak now because I have to rush.
Perfect.
If I don't speak now, I'm going to have to leave.
It's actually your turn, my darling. So please go ahead, then.
All right.
I will not make much ado about the introduction, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm under severe time pressures. My other meeting has just started. I think there was some confusion with how the program was set out and how it happened in reality, but that's okay. These things happen all the time. I'm going to say all protocol observed and acknowledge everyone who would have been here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So very quickly, my name is Fashia Hassan. I'm a SWAL leader. I'm also a youth activist in the country, but I'm also an MPL in Gauteng. I'm the youngest across all political parties. So I'm going to try to not repeat what other speakers have really mentioned. I'm going to talk a little bit about my sort of personal experiences in the space, which I think can also shed light on the realities, the lived experience on the matter. There's something that's not muted. It's difficult to speak over the noise. Okay, thanks. So I think the big thing that I really wanted to talk about today is around the intersection between young people, or being a young person, and a woman, particularly in the political space, because it's a bit of a double whammy. While you're in a particularly advantageous position, you also sometimes really put in difficult spaces. And I'm going to talk about that in particular. One of the things that I think we often experience as young women, and women as well, but as young women in particular, is that when we walk in the room, people immediately question our credentials. they immediately question whether we deserve to be here. Your competence is questioned, and the worst part about it is often people will, sort of silently or quietly gossip, who did she sleep with to get here? And that's one of my big points around today, around the over-sexualization of women, young women, in the political space. So while we are fighting extremely hard to be taken seriously and have a voice at the table, while we've worked incredibly hard to get to the spaces that we have been, there's this constant desire to try and put us in a space in which our entire identity and our entire being is centered around the over-sexualization of us in the space. So comments like what we're wearing, or how a particular dress or outfit looks, and it's around whether we're in relationships or not in relationships. Nobody comments suit of an MP, or nobody sort of comments on what male leaders are wearing in the space. But immediately, as a young woman, if you walk into the space, there's this added difficult sort of over-sexualization elements around it, and it becomes very, very challenging to sit at that same table and to be taken seriously when your entire identity and your entire reason for being there is sort of focused around your ability as a sex. And that's very scary. And I think it's not something we talk about. I think it's a taboo topic, and that's why I want to talk about it today. And it's also something that we constantly have to fight against. And that leads me to my next point about some of the difficulty of being a young woman in politics, is the fight against tokenism and this fight against a checkbox exercise. So now that we are entering into the space, often you'll find that people just want to check a box that you're here, that they don't necessarily want to take seriously your views or your ideas. There's this huge, okay, we've consulted young people, we've consulted women, done, but actually taken seriously what you have to say. And that's also something that I think we need to constantly fight against. Because one of the things we need to be very clear as women is that it's not enough to just have a seat at the table. It's not enough to just be present. We need to be able to have a meaningful seat at the table. We need to be having meaningful, substantive discussions so that when we say and when we give a comment on the youth unemployment strategy, or when we comment on our monetary or physical policy, it's not just we've consulted young people, now then we will listen, but nothing will actually translate into real, meaningful implementation. So that's another thing that I think is fundamental, and I think we need to be honest about being in the space. As much as we have fought for greater women representation, it doesn't automatically equal women liberation. It doesn't automatically equal the leveling of the playing fields or the change of the status quo. And that's my point, that it's about substantial, meaningful change, that it's not enough to just put women there. But I think also one of the benefits of having spoken closer to the end is it also is going to emphasize my next point, that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Particularly women who have sacrificed from before Mam Sophie du Preez, of course, into 1956, and even as recently as a few years ago. I mean, Katie will tell you that there's this. What I like about this panel is that there's this beautiful, genuine link of intergenerational elements between us, and how a lot of the work we did during Fees Must Fall and in the SRC paved the way for people like Katie who are now in the SRC, just as people like Itu, people like Mam Sophie du Preez, people like Mam Mali, people like the MMC who's hosting us today have paved the way for myself to enter into the space. And that's the other thing that I want to talk about, right? There's no need for us to try to reinvent the wheel. One of the big things about this intergenerational idea is that the challenges that I've spoken about right now, I'm not the first woman to encounter it, and I won't be the last. But what we need to do is find a way in which we are able to, yes, formally support each other, but also provide that informal support, that emotional support, that at the end of the day, when you're exhausted and you've given everything of yourself and you're so exhausted as a woman. I mean, today I was looking at the news, there was another woman who was wherein her boyfriend said light to their home, their family home, and her daughter, I think her daughter survived, but she was burned to death by her boyfriend. And it's a moment in which you say to yourself, it's exhausting being a woman in this country. It's beyond exhausting. It's beyond angering. It's beyond even the thought process of what it means to be here. And the reason why I cite this example is that it's not just the formal mentorship idea that's also important. It's also the informal part. On a day where I want to give up, on a day where it's too much, we should be able to pick up the phone or go and see a woman who's been in the space and say, but Mum Sophie, this is the experience I had. How did you with it when you went through it? And it's about that symbiosis between us, right? And I think Mum Mali spoke about it as well, that it's not just us as young people learning from the older generation. It's that we can learn from each other. There are things we can teach the older generation, and there are other things the older generation can teach us. So those lessons and ideas that move back and forth. And I think sometimes we miss this. Sometimes the belief is that an intergenerational conversation or an intergenerational idea is only the older generation teaching us. And I think that's really a missed opportunity because there's so much we can learn from each other and so much we can teach each other. Often you'll find that young people are a bit more adaptable and a bit more open and flexible to the new ideas. And that means there's a perfect combination between the two, the energy of young people, the experience of the older generation, and the need for us to put it together. And I agree quite particularly, of course, that there's and Katie, you also spoke to this, that there is a need for respect, and that is important. But I think we need to be careful in that we can't use this as a reason and as a notion to stifle young people and to stifle ideas that may be critical of us. One of the things that we've seen throughout history is young people instigating change and young people being at the forefront of that change. And we run the risk of silencing young people and of silencing that thing within us, that fire within us, if we just look at it through a plain lens, right? I think it needs to be particularly nuanced. And there's another thing that we also have to talk about here, right? And something that we as women are constantly conditioned to believe that we owe society a debt, that our very presence in the space is a favor. And that's something we need to unlearn, and it's something we need to be unapologetic about, because we are as deserving women to be in these positions, to sit at these tables, to have the voices we do as women as any other man. And that's something that is deeply entrenched in patriarchy, it's deeply entrenched in our society, and it's across the board. It's not just in politics. You'll find women in senior management positions, both in the public and the private sector, resigning earlier than their career peaking because of the kinds of pressures that we are subjected to, right? There's a different set of rules for us as women. You have to work twice as hard to be credited half as less. We have to contend with lesser pay. We have to contend with the pressures of trying to be a good spouse, a good mother, a good everything, but also around the centering of our identity, around our roles to other people. Never the centering of our identity as us as women, as people in society. And as superwoman or the superwoman hero sort of complex, that we feel like we must be the best executive, the best mother, the best spouse, the best everything. And by the time you're done with it, you have nothing left as a person, as a human being. We have nothing left for ourselves as women. And I think that's something we also need to unlearn, and something that we need to create a new standard for. Because I don't think we're doing ourselves or the generations who come after us any favors, in that we are still then chained to the ideas of what people think we should and shouldn't be doing. The ideas may be changing somewhat, but it still means that we're not in charge of our own fate. And that agency is a fundamental part of what our feminism should be about. And I know some people often think that they don't want to be a so feminist. They feel like it's this like weird word. Oh, I don't necessarily associate as a feminist, etc. But if you believe in the equality between men and women, and of course to include the trans community here as well, and that's also something that we need to reject. The idea that we're not feminists, the idea that we're not going to proudly self-identify as feminists, it's fundamentally important. I made a note while we were in the conversation. Mum Mali said that at 25. She was arrested. At 25, I was elected as the youngest MPL. And what was us is that the way is being paved for the women who come after ourselves. And the reason why I want to end on this note is that somebody recently said to me, if you are the only woman at the table, you've done something wrong. You cannot be normalizing being the only woman voice. We need to do everything in our power to bring more women, more young women to the space and to the table, such that it's normalized to have us there. It's not going to be, oh, now we need a quota. I want to get to a space in which we don't even have to have discussions on quota because women are already in that space and it's normalized to have women in these positions. So every day when you wake up, remember there's a responsibility on us, not just as leaders of society, as people, as human beings, as women, as feminists, to pave the way for the generation that's going to come after us. What are we doing every day to make that journey easier, to lay down that stone on the ground so that the woman who comes after me doesn't have to step on that thorn? And I want to say in closing that there are so many women on this call and so many women in our country who have sacrificed everything for us to be able to sit at the table and for us to make formal decision-making or have this formal decision-making power. And the fact that we are here shows progress. But is it enough progress? I don't know. Is it enough for us to say we're done? Not at all. We need to continue this journey and we need to continue this battle. And conversations like today are fundamentally important to create that symbiosis between us and the different generations. But I think in closing, just to say thank you. As a young woman in this space, thank you to all the women who have sacrificed so much so that I can sit here and I can be here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for staying on. And I think she's really talking about the definition of gender in itself tells us that yes, a social construct, but it also, if you look at the WHO definition in particular, it actually talks about women or men being assigned different roles, but also different opportunities, which means women have certain opportunities or certain opportunities are withheld from women. So that is how I do believe that some of the gender inequality, but the economic inequality arises because how gender is broadly defined anyways about our roles, our responsibilities, and because we've got so many roles and responsibilities that are predefined by society, by culture, by family members, by the church, by by a work culture of any sort. Will automatically make us as women more burdened. That's how we have the paid care work of women almost not recognized. And you'll have male colleagues who will say, yeah, this lockdown is hard because when you're at home, they'll tell you the fridge is not open, help with the kids, help with that. It's like, why do you have to be told to do that? You should have just done that anyway. So thank you for putting that out. And I think that amongst women as well, because not just women who become feminists about equality. So I think feminism does get a bad rap, but it's important that we make sure that we can redefine that in such a way that it does not bring about any undue conflict or tensions in that regard. So thank you very much, and hopefully you will make it to your next meeting. And hopefully you've already connected and you'll simply be able to listen in. Zuwaida, my darling, you are up next, and I think the last three speakers, Kate spoke about it, I think Dueling spoke about it, Fisher spoke about it as well, was passion. And I think one of the things that came through very clearly when you led that protest at Pretoria High School for Girls was just the sheer passion, sheer determination, this fire about you, and you've spoken in many other platforms before and still have a lot of that. And I'm just hoping that I think the last time you spoke was at Sophie du Brain's 85th birthday, Sophie, was it? In 2018. Was it 80 or 85, Sophie? And and there you spoke, and I just felt like there's so much fire in you, there's so much, you almost needed a lot of outlet. And I was hoping, I don't know why I didn't do it, but I was just really hoping that you have found spaces where you can have an outlet to express yourself and to put out that which you believe contributes to what you would have not thought this was a political struggle, but women in politics, and of course young women, which includes yourself, and the role of women in building a just and non-sexist society. So over to you, Zuwaida, dear.
Thank you so much, Mam Ntsiki. Thank you so much for having me on this platform. First and foremost, I'd like to just say all protocol is observed. And I'd like to just open up by saying I'm not quite sure whether it would be appropriate if I said Happy Women's Month, as when this country continue to live in fear every single day, and every single day the experience of being a woman is a toss coin between am I going to get raped or am I going to get killed. And so I'd just like to open up by saying that freedom is just a meaningless word for as long as women remain oppressed economically and socially. And so it brings me to about young women's role in creating anti-sexist society, because it is not enough that we are non-sexist. We have to be passionately anti-sexist. And so as young women, we play a very critical role, and we have a critical role as the future that we are trying to design is ours to occupy and inherit. And so we have to see the rise of young women occupying decision-making positions and are at the forefront of change making, particularly because the future is ours to inherit and occupy. And because of time, I'd like to just cut through immediately to the solutions I'd like to bring forward regarding the response to gender-based violence, as I feel that as a country, we cannot just respond when someone's daughter becomes a hashtag. We have to act swiftly, urgently, and immediately, because every single day in our country, women are dying at the hands of men whose names we do not know. We shouldn't have to know the name of the we should know the name of the perpetrator, and that is the name that should be trending. Which brings me to the solutions I'd like to bring forward regarding our response to gender-based violence. First and foremost, like as the previous panelists mentioned, that poverty plays a large role in the crisis that we're currently experiencing, as poverty in its is a very violent system and creates violence in it just merely existing. And so what we need to do is we need to ensure that we hand women the economic resources to empower themselves. Women shouldn't have to wait for someone to come and empower them, or for someone to tell them that they should feel empowered. Women should be handed economic capital to empower themselves, because one of the reasons which we see is that women still have an economic dependency on men, particularly in the rural areas. And so now looking to how government should act, first and foremost, I'd like to address an issue that we've seen existing in our government, that men in our country respond to what they see in power. And so if we have men in power who are perpetrators as well, men in our country are going to respond in the same way. And so we have to, at all costs, persecute those who are perpetrators and are in positions of power. Secondly, we have to act on restructuring the education system in our country, as the education system plays a large role in toxically socializing young boys in this country to think that they have authority over women's bodies. And I mention this as I'm going to give an example. When we teach children, when we give children sex education in schools, particularly in a subject called life orientation, for so long we focused on men being the ones who do onto women's bodies and don't do the action of sex with a woman, but do onto women's bodies, and which gives them the idea, and that already gives them the idea in which they have authority over a woman's body, and it makes them think that women's bodies are disposable. And I think that it is high time that we restructure the education system, particularly with this urgent crisis in our country. We cannot still have an education system which does not address the issues of gender in this country. And so we have to act swiftly in restructuring the education system. And now I'd like to speak to the justice system. It is urgent that we give perpetrators stronger sentences, as many perpetrators are repeat offenders. And what we see is that lockdown has been longer than many of the sentences of rapists.
Sorry, is it just on my side? Can everybody else hear her?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's it. There we go.
Okay. Apologies, muted. And so I was speaking to the justice system, and I was saying that it is so unfortunate that lockdown has actually been longer than many of the sentences of rapists and perpetrators of femicide in this country. And so it is urgent that we give stronger sentences, harsher sentences to perpetrators of rape and femicide in the country, and no bail at all costs. And another urgent issue that we have to see is that the list of sex offenders and femicide perpetrators has to be public. Every single day, women in this country die at the hands of men whose names we never know, at the hands of men who we don't know. We need to see that list being public. We need to see it. It is urgent that that list is public. And we also need to see the accountability from men, particularly responding to the and coming forward to actually end gender-based violence, as this is a problem created by men. And so we need to see men also coming to the table and speaking on ending gender-based violence. And secondly, I'd like to address the COVID-19 response. We urgently need to address the individual issues of women and girls in this country. In 2020, we cannot still be discussing whether sanitary pads should be free or not, whilst condoms are free. Menstruation isn't a choice, sex is a choice. And there are many girls during this lockdown who are unable, who had no access to sanitary pads. And so it is urgent that we grant women and girls free sanitary towels. In 2020, we cannot still be discussing this. It is urgent. There are many girls who would love to be at school, who would love to be at university, but unfortunately have to stay at home because they have sanitary pads. And so as I see that we've actually gone over time, I'd like to conclude by saying my generation is one that is impatient, and we are deliberately impatient, as we have a burning hunger and desire for emancipation, and we are not free until women have been emancipated from all forms of oppression. Thank you for having me.
Twaida, thank you.
Yes.
You're okay? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay. I can hear you.
All right. Were you done?
Yes, I was done. Because see
that speaking that says, "Listen to me some more," and ends while we were all still enthralled. And I thank you for raising the boy-child issue. And of course, it's important that we all are aware that we are raising children. Once when you go boy, girl, and then your boy child says, "No, mom, actually I don't feel like a boy, I actually feel like a girl," you're raising children, and once you compartmentalize us, and then all men are bad, or all women are not good enough, and we all have to prove ourselves, is problematic. I did hear your opening remark about there is essentially not much to be happy about on Women's Month, and maybe saying Happy Women's Month may not necessarily be a true reflection of whether as women we are indeed happy with this within the idea of a free, which of course you also question, and democratic South Africa, and we say we free from certain things, which would be apartheid and an oppressive government for one, and a democratic government being the other. The part that we've grappled with over the years is that we are celebrating Women's Day and Women's Month because of what Masofie du Brain and the generations before her have done, and the sure footing that they have set us on, and how we then choose to take on the baton. So therein lies what we are happy about Women's Month, is that we are no longer minors to our husbands. We have the right to vote. We also we're supposed to be able to have equal employment, equal work, equal pay for work of equal value was in the 1954 Women's Charter. It still is not happening in South Africa today. We're still about 30 cents less per rand than men are being paid. It doesn't matter where you are. Somebody would come in as a chief director in government. A woman, it's their first year. A man would get the fifth notch, which means it is equivalent as if he has been there for the past 5 years. But let us not tire from raising the voice and disagree on what constitutes happiness and where the whole notion that it is Happy Women's Month or Happy Women's Day comes from. And I think Fascia was also talking about reinventing the wheel and making sure that we take heed of what progress we have made. So to our speakers, I would like to say thank you very much. We will then have closing remarks. I don't know, sometimes when you're program director, you're also being directed somewhere. I just want to check if we are all still good. We've got about 25 minutes to go. I'd like to open this up for questions and answers. Let me see if I can see hands, and then just for a few minutes, and then we will then do a summation and have a close. I think if you do raise your hand, I should be able to see it so that we can then take the matters forward. Are there any questions that are arising? If you could please raise your hand if you have a hand. Sometimes people don't have a hand, and I understand that you are welcome to simply speak out. I will try and hear you. Like I don't have a hand, but I can see everybody else. No, it's a lot to chew on. But if all 60 odd of us are comfortable, MEC Naya, I'm happy to do a summation. I see News Africa is here too. Not sure if they have questions for any of our panelists. And before I then do a summation and allow Umme Thandi to give us a vote of thanks. Having observed that moment of silence. Oh, is somebody speaking? Patricia? Patricia Maxine Zizi, I see you are unmuted. Do you want to say something?
No, I thought. No. I thought maybe you said you must do a vote of thanks, Madam Program Director.
Oh, not yet. Don't you worry. I will
okay.
call for the vote thanks just now.
Okay.
All right. MMC Mgcina and MMC Mokoena, the executive mayor, and fellow colleagues who are on the platform, our panelists. I think it is always useful to have actionables following our discussions. And we now have the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence with 6 different pillars, and when we look at women in politics, we may talk about gender-based violence in the home, but there is certainly gender-based violence within our political spaces that we must recognize and take into account so that when women need to ascend, Ambassador Tinzo always says to women's gatherings, do not ascend to any political position in a horizontal position, lest you are unable to ascend vertically. So always stay vertical in pursuance of your position, even within the political spheres. And of course, we will always be the go-to people simply because we have the numbers, as Sophie Dubrain has indicated. Perseverance, persistence were also the issues that came up, that we have to persevere, we have to persist, we have to keep going. We dare not give up. Yes, it is true, as Sophie says, that we are still marginalized and discriminated against. Councillor Mokoena indicated that the fight was not in vain. The sacrifices were not in vain. 7 days, 7 nights without sleep, tortured and interrogated for all those days. Essentially, it's 14 days because it's really, it's 7 nights and 7 days. And then only to be discriminated against because of your age as you pursue your role in leadership is quite not only hurtful, but actually is a reversal of gains and tramples on the very work that people have done. And that, of course, within the student fraternity, it is important to recognize that students have a role, women students in particular, that they are capable and need not prove themselves any more than male students need to prove themselves in making sure that they are assuming leadership positions within the university itself, and that their voices are able to be heard. It was also a priority in terms of our policies and governance and government that Itumeleng was talking about, that while those are important, it's the implementation, realization. So when we talk about the realization, the emancipation and the empowerment of women is important, that we need to be free from political, legal, social, and economic trappings or barriers there too, which as Zweda then alluded to earlier, to say, freedom can also be an elusive term in terms of what are we really, or where are we really free? Are we free in society in general? Are we free only in our homes? Where are we actually able to exercise this freedom? And that freedom is the emancipation, which we talk about, is that we are free from legal and limitations, social, economic, and political limitations as well. So the actions that we need to ensure that we're taking MMC are those of the minimizing and removal of barriers to access. And access, of course, comes into the access of information, of what Puma Sophie did, but also it's also access to economic opportunities. How do we give effect to the actual emancipation of women, and how to ensure that there is economic transformation? Gauteng as a province has been exemplary over the years in actually keeping the data of the number of departments and how much they have spent. And it was the Department of Infrastructure that I believe maybe 2 years ago had only spent 1% of the procurement budget on women. And I don't know if they've improved since, but if provinces, which is really what the president was talking about, and when the MMC opened for us, she mentioned that the president had talked about 40% procurement for women, but I had also indicated that only 30%, 29 to 30% of women-owned businesses are registered. And of course, the risk we run there is how do we ensure more women are registered, which will be the work of the MMCs at this point. How do we ensure more women are registered on the National Treasury database, but also how to ensure that men are not using women to front. Remember, Black people were used to front for companies. How are we ensuring that Black women and women in general are not going to be used to front for that? And feminism being in its basic form an issue of equality and a theory of equality, and that we need not really be pulling our hair out on who is a feminist or not a feminist, and how we negatively label those things. That is also a form of discrimination that we should all be able to proudly state that we are feminist in the event that we choose to do so. And of course, I think, Zweda, I do want you to continue and encourage you to be alongside the Masofita Brains, the Mokoena, in raising your views as sharply as you always do, so that we are able to make sure that we know that we have a new generation of Zwedas, because we'll say Boma Sophie, Boma Sisulu, so we have the Zwedas who then come through, of course, with great recognition. You also have great responsibility, and of course it would be unfairly put on you than it would be against men. But in the end, Comrade Chris Vondo and colleagues, the action plan you put we've talked, and now there's a plan in place. How do we measure? The president said for the next 12 months, every department needs to show how much they are actually spending on procurement for women. how much of their budget is going to. So it's a very tangible, it's a monthly thing. Finance is done in year. There's in-year monitoring that happens every month. Can we just have the data? It's just that simple. Is your data desegregated by gender? Yes or no? Is it desegregated by disability? By in terms of young women, how many young women are actually getting the tenders? Now, of course, we've got the big PPE corruption, and now ANC, as the president has indicated, is the face of corruption. And because the ANC is in government and is the governing party, it is important that we speak to truth to power, and say that women are less likely to be corrupt than men, and women step up and indicate the type of leadership that you actually can exhibit. And I said that without fear, favor, and out of no fear of contradiction at all, although the media will always put the women first as a name to catch, because it would attract more attention, because it's so unlikely. But you will always say it was not Priscilla who got the tender, but you will, because it's her husband who got it, but you'll always talk about her instead. And then, the husband will be a by the way, so that the story sells because of a woman. But it is also an opportunity, just like COVID has an opportunity for all of us to, as Mampumzile Mlambo indicate, to live life differently, to be more innovative in our lives. How is the city of Johannesburg going to be more innovative in ensuring that they ensure good governance, a clean governance? But how is the city of Johannesburg going to be more innovative and lead the charge as a metro of ensuring that not only are women empowered, not only are women represented, but that is sustained at both a social, at a social, political, and at an economic level, Honorable Mayor? That would be the charge, to say, can we please have the evidence? So we are now taught, we've spoken, where people have been heard. The only way we know that we've been heard is when we measure what is being put in place. What we do not measure won't count. And once you put measures in place, then we can say the dialogue we had has yielded these results. I would want to conclude as a summary there. And if I have left out an important point that a member of the panel may want to raise, please go ahead and do so. If not, I would certainly like to hand over to, I thought it would be Methandi who's doing the vote of thanks, but I understand it might be Patricia who's doing it. But let me just see if from any of the panelists there are any comments that they would like to raise or add to the summary. In the absence of any further comments, can we then have the vote of thanks, please? But maybe I should just thank the MMC and the Executive Mayor for the opportunity to facilitate this dialogue. Maybe I should be the first one to just say thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And I will now hand over to Mayor Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. My name is Thandiwe Bhoko. I know they call me Deputy, but my name is Thandiwe Bhoko, a chairperson of GOT Committee. Executive Mayor.
Sorry, Methandiwe. Sorry, Methandiwe. I think you were using Patricia's phone, so it sounds like it looked like Patricia. Yes. Please go ahead. My apologies.
Okay. Executive Mayor, Comrade Jeffrey Mlando. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I have been given a small yet very big task to say thank you to everyone who took part on this discussion today. Firstly, I would like to thank Mama Sophie Dupré, our struggle stalwarts and the only serving member of the historic 1956 Women's March to Pretoria. We were grateful for our participation, Mama Sophie, and yours of wisdom. And we wish you a good health and many more years to come. Secondly, I want to say thank you to Taphumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, former Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, currently Executive Director of UN Women. Even thought you were unable to be with us. We thank you that you were able to share your insight with us by the video. My leaders, MMC Madimukwena, MMC Mtrina, MMC Arnold, thank you for the struggle and thank you for being in the forefront of the effort by the City of Johannesburg to develop, improve the lives of our women in our city. To you, young dynamic leaders and speakers, Ms. Fasi, Ms. Itumeleng Mafasi, Ms. Kati Moget, and Ms. Zeika Patel, on behalf of the City of Johannesburg and its citizens, I take off my hat for you, and may you continue to shine and be a beacon of hope to the million of girls and young women who took up to you for you. This is not the end of the direction with you, and we hope that you will continue to join us in other programs aimed at improving the status of women in the city. I also wish to thank the officials who have worked tirelessly to make this program the success it was. Lastly, thank you as well to the program director and facilitators for the work that you sterling job. And thank you very much for was able to join us and take part in this program. Thank you and goodbye. Malibongwe.
Igama lamakhosikazi.
Igama lamakhosikazi.
Gama
Lamakhosikazi.
Thank you everyone for being part of this webinar. Until next time.
Thank you, Sister Nziki.
You're most welcome. Take care.
Wow, thank you so much, Ms. Nziki. Thank you so much. What a fruitful engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you,